What is going on, Canes Sport? Izubee Charles, joined by Stephen Wagner for another Inside Canes Recruiting podcast. Stephen, spring is underway down there in Coral Gables, and we're seeing a lot of faces make their way through the Heck Center, checking out the Miami Hurricanes for their spring practices. Obviously, Monday and Wednesday were the first 2 days, and then Friday is going to be the third day with a huge visitor list and a lot of big-time names expected. But we're going to hit the rewind button a little bit and talk about Miami's latest 2026 commitment, Ben Cogden, 2026 four-star offensive lineman from Ohio State. Miami goes in the Big Ten territory and lands one of the fastest rising offensive line prospects in the 2026 class. Second visit to Miami was all that he needed to see to lock in with the Canes, and he came down to his family and left South Florida very, very impressed. And as the fourth member of the Miami Hurricanes 2026 class, Stephen, I know we talked about it a little bit earlier this week about Ben's commitment. Just, what are your quick thoughts about, Miami landing that big time recruit, after having some time to reflect on that decision?
Man, this kid was like built in a lab. If you were building offensive tackles, I mean, he completely checks every single box. Probably around the 6'7" range. Right now, he wrestles at about 280 pounds. He can get up to 300 pounds. Very flexible, very athletic, great bend. Right now, definitely more of a force in the run game than he is in the pass game. But I do think he has traits that can be easily developed. I think this is a kid who can absolutely be a high-end starter at a program like Miami. I love the pickup. I think this is very, very consistent with what Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal have looked for in offensive linemen. And now he's going ahead and completely shutting down his recruitment. It seems that him and his family are really big on loyalty. So right now, I'm banking on him being a member of Miami's class.
That's awesome. And then one thing that I saw after Ben committed to the Canes, he was on Twitter doing his, recruiting efforts, tweeting at different, Miami 2026 targets, whether that be Derek Cooper or Jackson Cantwell, even some guys in Ohio, which you love to see from a guy that, just committed less than 24 hours ago. But speaking about, fellow 2026 recruits and Miami targets, obviously Ben's the first offensive lineman in that class. But Steven, there are a lot of big time names, and one that I just mentioned, Jackson Cantwell, who Ben tweeted at saying, "Hey, join me at Miami. Let's go win a Joe Moore Award." Obviously, Cantwell is a big name on the Hurricanes recruiting board for offensive linemen and Coach Mirabal. Just who are some other names that you're kind of, taking a look at and saying, hey, maybe this guy could be next, joining Ben on that offensive line?
Man, there are a lot of offensive linemen on Miami's board right now. There isn't really one specific name that I look at and I think, oh yeah, that kid's probably getting close. But we know that they're casting a really wide net. We know for the other offensive tackle spot, they would love to get Jackson Cantwell, obviously, Kenai Pepe. From IMG Academy, really high-end four-star offensive tackle. That's another guy that Miami absolutely loves. Grant Wise at center, I think, is a name that obviously makes a lot of sense. His father being Ty Wise, the former Hurricane who played for Butch Davis in the 90s. Then looking at some of the other names, Brett Collegier, at offensive guard over at IMG Academy. That's another name they're pursuing very heavily. Janari Carr, the other guard at IMG Academy. He also has an official visit locked in with Miami. That's a name that's very consistently been kind of a popular name in a lot of recruiting circles. He's been a four-star offensive lineman for a while. Deron Parks, the kid previously from West Virginia, who now lives in the Miami area. Not the Miami area, the Tampa area. Is another name Miami's been making a heck of an effort for. Locally, you've got Ryan Moret from Miami Southridge. I know I know the South Florida area isn't historically known for producing offensive linemen, but Moret is a guy who Miami has definitely made a pretty strong effort for. Sam Greer up in Ohio, that's another kid Miami's going after early. And man, I'm sure there are some names that I'm leaving off that, or there's some names that I'm leaving off that list. But off the top of my head, those are definitely some big priorities the Hurricanes would absolutely love to have.
Yeah, Coach Mirabal trying to add more bricks to that great wall of Mirabal, and that's kind of one of my favorite sayings that have come out of the Hurricanes program, the Great Wall of Mirabal. It's absolutely true. He's bringing in massive offensive linemen. Like you mentioned, Miami as a type, it's big guys who can move. And Ben Cogden is just, just that. Obviously, you mentioned his wrestling background, real flexible, has great bend. You mentioned a monster in the run game, and a guy that you can just see fitting into, Miami's culture and what they're trying to do in the trenches. So great recruiting win for the Miami Hurricanes. And like you said, he's shutting down his recruitment and starting to recruit for that 2026 class as well, which is absolutely massive. But going to stick to the offensive side of the ball and talk about another big time prospect that was on campus earlier this week, and that's five-star wide receiver Tristan Keys out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's actually hilarious. You can talk to him, you hear that country accent, that little country twang, but he's absolutely an awesome kid. Spent his first real time in Miami. He's been down there for the junior days, but as we all know, those days can be hectic when there's close to 600 to 700 kids coming through those doors. But on Monday he had the actual chance to really look at Miami, sit down with Coach Kevin Beard, sit down with Coach Mario Cristobal, and had a lot of great things to say about those guys. And the biggest thing that I took away from our conversation is he said, hey, Miami has the number one offense in the country this past year. Why not check out the number one offense? Miami has 3 wide receivers participating in the NFL Combine. They're likely to be drafted. They're doing something right. Let me go check that out. He had the chance to see what they had to offer. Spoke with Coach Shannon Dawson. Really had a lot of great things to say about Shannon Dawson's offense and how he uses wide receivers. Obviously, with his days in West Virginia, back in the day with Geno Smith and those guys, we know how dynamic those offenses were. Houston with Tank Dell, who's some of these kids' favorite wide receivers, and these past few years with Xavier Streppel, Jacoby George, Isaiah Horton, and Sam Brown. So Tristan Keys is really interested in the Hurricanes. He locked in his official visit for May 30th, and he's looking to make his way back potentially again during the spring, but he will 100% be back in Miami on May 30th. Steven, just want to ask you about Tristan Keys. Obviously, he's the number one wide receiver in the 2026 class. He can go anywhere he wants to, but how big do you think this past visit on Monday was for the Hurricanes in his recruitment?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to really say in the moment how big a spring visit ended up being for a kid. Especially because a lot of these spring visits, they're not about landing commitments; they're about setting yourself up for the next step. It's you get a kid on campus this time to be able to get him on campus again later in the month or maybe later in the spring, and then ultimately get an official visit where you can really hunker down and make your recruiting pitch, and hopefully that'll set you up going into the fall, or at the very least, even if he doesn't commit or he commits elsewhere, you're at least able to kind of lay that foundation to potentially flip him down the road. I do think that him getting down was definitely worth something. I'm not going to act like it wasn't worth anything, but I'm really going to be more interested to see if Miami is going to be able to get him back on campus because, like you said, number one receiver, Miami has absolutely kind of worked their way into that mix. Miami's absolutely a team that I would consider in the mix for Tristan Keys. I think they probably have some more work to do. I don't think he's, going to be committing to the Hurricanes yet, but they've absolutely laid the framework with this visit, and I think they've set themselves up to potentially be able to continue laying the framework down the line with future trips.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And you mentioned, Miami in the mix, but there are a ton of SEC programs. Miami is the only program outside of the SEC that Tristan Keys is taking an official visit to. I believe Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and I think 2 or 3 more SEC programs or schools in his top 6. But we always have to ask the question with a kid from Mississippi: hey, do you want to play outside of SEC country? And he's made it clear. He said, hey, football players, good football players play football anywhere. Obviously, I'm in Mississippi. I'm an hour away from LSU. I'm close to A&M. I'm close to Georgia. I'm close to all those schools. But good players play anywhere. He said seeing Miami have 3 wide receivers in that combine and having that number one offense is kind of piquing his interest in the Canes and giving them a real shot in his recruitment. Obviously, a super long way to go in that. But I think this visit was a great stepping stone, like you mentioned, for the Hurricanes and really solidifying them as a program that Tristan Keys is going to take seriously in his recruitment. So if you haven't already, make sure to check out that update that we did on Tristan Keys and all the latest in his recruitment. But we're going to stick with the wide receiver talk and talk about a young man out of South Florida, Miami Northwestern's own Calvin Russell, 2026 wide receiver, who's just as high as Tristan Keys on the Hurricanes recruiting board. And Steven, we've been going back and forth over the past 2 weeks on the message boards about the Syracuse threat and all this good stuff. But we talked to some people down there in Coral Gables, and they're pretty confident where they stand with Calvin Russell and all that good stuff. Obviously, Syracuse is making a big push, but Miami still really likes where they stand with that. Steven, just what are your thoughts on Calvin Russell after talking with him and then talking to some people down there in Coral Gables as well?
Yeah, I definitely think the Hurricanes are very much still in that mix for Calvin Russell. Kind of having the chance to ask around. It does seem like Miami is a little bit more confident in their effort for Calvin than maybe the media and us in the media have kind of depicted it to be. It sounds to me like Miami is not underestimating the value of the relationship that Kevin Beard has with Calvin Russell. Now, I think if Kevin Beard went to Syracuse, I think that would have been really bad. I think that really would have hurt Miami's chances. But the facts are, he's still in Coral Gables. He's still on Miami staff, and I do think that the connection that they have, the relationship he's built with Calvin Russell's family, I absolutely think that has a tremendous amount of value, and it's not something that I'm sleeping on at all. Right now, if you had to ask me right this second, where do I think he's going to go? I'd say Syracuse. But do I think that Miami absolutely could very much get him? Yeah, I definitely do. And keep in mind, I'm just saying I think that's where he would go right now. That answer could change tomorrow or the day after that or 15 minutes from now. But right this second, that's just what I think. But I absolutely do consider Miami to be in very much in the mix. I think he'll end up at one of those two schools.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is recruitment that's going to be very fluid, and you mentioned something that I want to continue to talk about, and that's Kevin Beard's relationship with not only Calvin Russell but his mother as well, Shaniva Broussard, who is a former Miami Hurricanes women's basketball player inducted into the UM Sports Hall of Fame, and her and Kevin Beard attended the University of Miami at the same time, so their connections go way back to their college days, and obviously there's some type of trust and a big relationship between Beard and that entire family. So I feel like that is something that's worth speaking about and monitoring that situation. Obviously, Fred Brown has, been absolutely balls to the wall with Calvin Russell and a lot of South Florida prospects. I feel like every other kid that we talk to that's walking through those doors down there saying, oh, Syracuse this, Syracuse that, Syracuse that, whether that be Tadarius Hughes or Kenton Dobson in the 2027 class, there are just numerous guys down here that are saying Syracuse in the mix. Obviously, we're not, trying to prop up Syracuse and say, hey, they're this juggernaut on the recruiting show, but they have, set their sights on a lot of South Florida talents and are, making some interesting runs at these guys, which is going to be something worth monitoring. And they have that head to head, so they have those bragging rights about, hey, we beat this team straight up. I mean, they can't say much about us, so they have those bragging rights. So Miami kind of gets there, get back for that game. But an interesting recruiting pitch right there. Hey, we beat the team that's recruiting you. What can they say? But a lot of top guys, have Syracuse in the mix, including Calvin Russell, who we think is going to be a very interesting recruitment battle, and we're going to have you updated throughout it all on canesport.com. So if you haven't checked that out, the story on him, make sure to check that out and give it a read. And then I'm going to move on to Friday, Stephen. A few, big time names will be down there in Coral Gables as they continue to roll through spring practice. Going to be spring practice number 3. Obviously, headlining the group, 2026 Miami commit Darion Coleman, who's been on an absolute tear since the start of 2025. Recently got bumped into the top 175 according to On3's rankings. Spoke with On3 scouting director Cody Belair, who said his arm is absolutely gifted. Make sure to check out that story. He says, why he believes he jumped into that top 175, what he loves the most about him, is what are some areas that he thinks, Darion can improve on. So make sure to check that out. And then we move on. Derek Cooper, one of Miami's top running back targets in that 2026 class, is going to be on campus. Steven, let's talk a little bit about Derek Cooper. His big thing in his recruitment is development. If you ask him, hey, what's going to be the separation in recruitment, he says, whichever program can develop me the best. And now Miami has a good stable of running backs. Obviously, Mark Fletcher's entering his 3rd year. He's healthy now. This is actually his first spring being healthy, so we're going to see what he can do as a junior, but he's taking the steps in the right direction each year. And then obviously Jordan Lau last year had that kind of freshman, miniature breakout campaign. Not going to call it a breakout campaign because he was the 3rd back, but he's shown a lot of people what he can do that has, people excited down there in Coral Gables. So, Steven, just wanted your thoughts about, Derek Cooper and him preaching development. And do you think, Miami has a legitimate shot to keep him in South Florida?
I think Miami has a great shot to keep him in South Florida. Now, he's, played his cards kind of, close to the chest personally. But right now, I do kind of lean toward him ultimately ending up a Hurricane. I think, excuse me. I think that the job Miami has done recruiting him and recruiting Chaminade really here over the last 2 years. Between or yeah, I guess it would. I guess it would be the last 2 years, and then this year would be the third year. Thinking of guys like JoJo Trader and Zaquan Patterson in 2024, and then Dante Simpson and Chris Ewald in 2025. Definitely looks like Derek Cooper could kind of be that next guy that Miami gets here this year in the 2026 cycle. The Hurricanes absolutely love him. I'd say he is kind of one of those quintessential must gets. I mean, for the fact that he's just really freaking good at football. He's a really good running back. First and foremost, but he's kind of flirted with the idea of well, what if I played safety? What if I played linebacker? What if I got a snap here on defense, a snap there on defense? Some stuff like that. I think Miami is going to do whatever it takes to keep him home. Right now, I think he's going to end up at Miami. I think the Hurricanes have just continued to do very, very well for him for a while now. Now when that might happen, I don't know. I don't think he's in a rush. I know he wants to visit a lot of schools this spring. He's got, I think, 6 official visits lined up too. But I do think that Miami is absolutely going to be that team we're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and that Chaminade to Miami pipeline, has been pretty strong. Like you mentioned, 2024, Zaquan Patterson, JoJo Trader, 2025, Dante Simpson, and Chris Ewald. 2026, there's 2 other guys, on that team, as we just talked about, Derek Cooper, as well as Jason Lopez, who is becoming a name to know in that 2026 class. Recently, had a few national reporters starting to, write about him, create buzz, around his name. But he's a guy, if you're tapped in with the Cane Sport message boards, we've been talking about him since last spring as someone we really, really like. And he's going to be one of those guys on campus as well. Steven, I have said the world about Jason Lopez after watching him play basketball, after watching him dominate last fall. You had the chance to also watch him, at the Under Armour camp this year, where he was one of the most impressive wide receivers. Just to wrap up the show today before closing out, just quick thoughts on Jason Lopez as a prospect, and with Miami hosting him on Friday, what are your thoughts on that as well too?
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly clear to me that Miami really wants to find the next version of Xavier Restrepo. I mean, this is what they went after Malachi Toney last year, who obviously the comparables absolutely are there. Similar size, similar frame, similar quickness. Reliable, smaller target over the middle. Really, really good hands. Just straight up does not catch the ball. Has sticky freaking hands. Then this year they're going after. Jason Lopez, who is basically, a different version of the same player. Also from the South Florida area, a little bit of a smaller guy, really good footwork, good route runner, really good receiver over the middle, very consistent hands, has really good understanding of spacing and leverage and zone coverages. And all those things. Very mature as a kid, just as a young man in general. It really does look like Miami's just trying to find who is going to be the next Xavier Restrepo, because they understand how valuable he's been to their offense really over the last 2 years. I know previously, he dealt with some injuries and stuff like that, but the last 2 years when he was healthy, I think they understand just how good a slot receiver can be in Shannon Dawson's offense. And I think that they're just trying to find another one wherever they can. I think they're really trying to replicate it, Restrepo.
Yeah, those 2 guys, I feel like those are great comparisons. And Malachi Toney has been on an absolute tear, these first 2 spring practice, and just watching him in the one-on-ones and the route on air drills that we can't really, post about or post videos about, but just if he's doing a great job down there. And Jason Lopez has all that potential to be another guy, plug-and-play guy that makes plays early on in his career. He's going to be down there on campus on Friday, tomorrow, and there's going to be a lot of the other big-time targets on campus tomorrow. We'll have you covered from A to Z with all those guys, so make sure to stay tuned with canesport.com. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe if you like this video. And if you're not already tapped in with canesport.com, make sure to head there, check out all our articles, whether that be Miami Hurricanes football, recruiting, basketball, and baseball as well. If you like this video, leave a big thumbs up. For Steven Wagner, I'm Izubee Charles. Thank you all for watching. Have a great rest of your day.